We'd like to, as I said, keep it very informal, just by way in terms of the procedure of the budget, just in case you are unfamiliar with it. As announced yesterday, the budget will now be delivered on the 29th of June, which is the day before the public holiday, which is the 30th, which is the Sports and Wellness Day. Prior to that, what actually happens is, apart from these consultations, a couple of weeks ago, the Permanent Secretary for Economy met with the permanent secretaries across the table from the other ministries, went through their budget presentation, and then from next week, Monday, I sit with her across the table with the other ministers and their permanent secretaries, and again go through their own presentations, because obviously different ministries have different requirements. We go through it with a very sharp pencil, of course, given the expenditure. We all have limited resources, and we need to be able to work within those limited resources, but at the same time being cognizant of the fact that we need to put national priorities at the forefront, in particular focusing on, as government's policy, to broaden the economic base, to ensure that we have economic growth, to ensure that we have sustained economic growth, and also employment generation, and also looking after, of course, the social aspects of our society. We have a very short presentation for you, and we'll go through the figures that actually have been independently generated by the Reserve Bank of Fiji, that carries out its own survey. It will give you some food for thought in respect of where we are, what sectors of the economy are growing, what are the priorities, what do these figures mean. So actually, when we do stand up and talk about the budget, you know exactly what is happening. Once the budget is delivered on the 29th of June, the budget, of course, does not come into effect. It comes into effect only when the budget is passed. And the budget is passed after Parliament approves it. So by law, we have to have at least 1 week break from the presentation of the budget, which is on the 29th, to the actual debate. So we then hope to, of course, after the 29th of June, have about a week's break, and then Parliament will convene, and then we debate the budget. Once the budget gets approved, the budget then comes to effect from the 1st of August, because we've changed our financial year from last year. The financial year now is from the 1st of August 2017 to the 31st of July 2018. So that in a nutshell is what happens. As I said, the budget does not come into effect until the 1st of August. The only thing that does come into effect from the date of announcement is if there is any increase or decrease in the tariff rates. So as you know, that we started last year the announcement of the budget in the evenings. So you can all go home and watch and have your dinner and eat your meal and watch the budget. And not choke on the meal. Hopefully a very nice meal. And then once the budget is announced, then from midnight onwards, any tariff increase then comes into effect. So for example, if we decrease the tariff on cigarettes or alcohol, which is very unlikely, normally it increases. But if we decrease the tariff rate on something else or increase it on something else, it comes into effect from midnight, immediately after midnight the next day. So I'll do a very short presentation, and then we'll open up the floor. Please don't hesitate to ask any questions. Nothing is too silly or too hard. You can also, of course, make your submissions. You can give your comments. You also have the opportunity to give in your written submissions. If you've already done that, you may also want to, after this, give some submissions. We'll show you addresses you can send it to, both by email and postal address. But we prefer you send it by email, because all these submissions will close by the 19th of May, next Friday. Next Friday, yes, it is next Friday. So with that in mind, we'll start off with the first presentation. Okay. Now, we talk about economic growth. It's only the second time in Fiji's history since independence have we had 7 years of consecutive growth rate, which essentially is there. Economic growth obviously is very critical, because when the economy grows, it means more jobs, the creation of more jobs, robustness within the economy. I'm sure a lot of you understand that. I don't need to go into very much detail. I've been talking to high school students yesterday, so I have to change my mode of communication. But generally, you'll find that whenever you have a cyclone, we don't like cyclones. It kills people, it damages your property, it causes a lot of distress, plus it costs a lot of money. Now, generally of cyclones, the economic growth rate goes into negative gear. In Fiji, fortunately, notwithstanding the fact that the cyclone Winston wiped off nearly 1/3 of the value of our GDP, about 1.4 billion US dollars it cost us. Despite that, the economy is still growing at 2%. Generally, with that kind of devastation, you expect it to grow into the negative space, but it has actually stayed in the positive space. We expect the projected growth rates are in excess of 3% going forward. These figures are, of course, as of October 2016. These figures are put together by the Reserve Bank of Fiji. I would propose that these growth rates probably would be more upwards if we looked at it. So we set for eighth year consecutive growth rate. If that happens, it will be completely unprecedented. And the way that figures are showing, we probably have 10 years of consecutive growth rate. What are the areas that contribute to the economy? As you can see, that agriculture is 0.31%. I hope I'm not in your way. Fisheries is very low, 0.02. Forestry is even lower, 0.01. Manufacturing is quite significant. We do manufacture quite a few things now in Fiji. That also includes the manufacture of sugar in that graph there. Construction is quite significant. I would suggest that construction now is even much bigger, in particular with the rebuild efforts. Government is already spending now in excess of about $170 million only on schools. So the cyclone Winston, in terms of budgetary allocation, will be approximately $220 odd million now, given the school reconstruction expenses. Mining, water, services sector is one area that we believe that there's a lot of growth. There is in Fiji at the moment more SIM cards in operation than actual people. I know some of you keep 2 SIM cards. Some of you keep it for right reasons, some of you probably keep it for wrong reasons. But the fact of the matter is there are more SIM cards in operation. There are nearly 500,000 smart mobile phones in operation in Fiji at the moment. As you know, with zero rate of duty in smartphones, so all of you can do your Facebooks and your Vibers and what have you, and have access to internet, because internet connectivity is very low penetration rate. We looked at it, very low penetration rate. The way to get a much deeper penetration rate as far as internet connection was obviously through mobile phones. So there is potential, because those people who are technologically savvy means that we can actually have business or enterprise attraction for the technological sector, like call centers, back-end processing. Transportation sector, wholesale, retail, they're fairly self-explanatory. Now, the objective of any government is to have a broad-based economic growth. You cannot simply depend on 1 or 2 industries, because you leave yourself vulnerable. As I explained to some people yesterday, that if we, for example, simply depended on tourism and sugar, and assuming you had a very bad cyclone, and it affected all the tourism properties and damaged all the sugar crops, we'll be in dire straits. So we need to be able to have a broad-based economic growth contribution factor to the overall economic growth. What are the things that Reserve Bank looks at? Investment indicators. These are the investment indicators. Value of building permits between that period went up by 12.7%. Value of work put in place, in other words, construction that's actually on foot, went up by 10.5%. Domestic cement sales went up by 11.1%. People don't buy cement to keep it underneath their house, they buy cement to build things. And construction is very, very important. Just to put into perspective, the reason why we like construction is because when you want to, for example, build this lecture theatre, you need somebody to come and dig the foundation. You need somebody to lay the steel, you need somebody to lay the cement, pour the cement, you need somebody to do the electrical work, somebody to do the plumbing work, somebody to do the painting, somebody to do the laying of the tiles, the whole bang lot. Everybody gets paid money. It creates employment. When people have money in their pockets, they go and spend their money. When they spend money, they pay VAT. When they pay VAT, we collect VAT. We spend that money on you, on the country. It creates robustness. When there's a lot more retail sales, the shopkeepers will hire more people to be able to carry out the sales for them. So construction is has a good multiplier effect. Government capital expenditure increased by 7.8%. These are the 3 areas where you had a decrease: new investment lending, lending for real estate, lending for building construction. In that period, January to September, it went down. Of course, that's immediately after Cyclone Winston. Remember, we had Cyclone Winston in February. Consumption indicators. A lot of cars on the roads. You now have traffic jams in Lautoka. In the public consultation, somebody said to us, why don't you build flyovers in Lautoka city? There's too many cars, we're tired of the city, of the traffic jams. New vehicle registration went up by 27.5%. Second-hand vehicle registration went up by 7.8%. Many people in Fiji see the buying of a car as an indication of their social mobility in the socio-economic scale. My son is doing well, my daughter is doing well, and they've just bought a car. People feel proud about it. Taking the public transportation is not necessarily seen as something you do if you're doing well in society. That's the mindset. Of course, we'll need to change that very soon, in particular when you get too much traffic jams. New lending to wholesale and retail trade improved by 13.2%. Import of consumption goods. Basically every single thing. This young man is wearing a watch that's not made in Fiji. He's wearing that shirt. It may be made in Fiji, but the cloth comes from overseas. The Sulu is wearing may be sewn in Fiji, but the cloth comes from overseas. The pen he has is made overseas. So consumption goods. These are consumption goods, a general indication of people spending money, but also has implications, of course, on the level of foreign reserves you need to have, which I'll come back to later. PAYE, this is a tax you pay when you are earning a salary. That has gone up. Generally, that would go up for two reasons. Either there are more people working, therefore more taxes are being paid, and or the salaries have gone up. That's why your PAYE collection goes up. New job advertisements went up by 15.1%. Personal remittances, these are your friends, family and relatives who may be living overseas, sending you money. We have rugby players working in France earning lots of money. They send their money back to their relatives. We have nurses, we have caregivers in North America, we have people working as security guards in the Middle East. These are the people sending back money, and personal remittances actually went up by 5%. In fact, this is our second largest foreign reserves earner, as opposed to number one being tourism. Variable consumption went up, notwithstanding the fact that VAT decreased from 15% to 9%, the collection of VAT went up because people obviously are spending more money. New lending to private individuals actually decreased by 4.7%. This is just to indicate, just by comparison, 2005, there were 6,088 second-hand vehicles registered in that year. By comparison, 2016, 10,152 vehicles were on the road, second-hand vehicles. 3,300 second-hand new vehicles, sorry. By comparison, nearly 5,000 in 2016. So you can see a huge jump in the number of new vehicles on the road, both second-hand and new. We of course like the dark blue one. We like people buying newer technology because it means less carbon footprint. We of course are working towards getting fuel grade higher than Euro 2. Retail sales, this again very sort of basic set of figures that goes to show RBF goes out and measures retail sales. Average growth in that period, in this period from 2006 to 2016 is 7.1%. So retail sales are fairly good. Of course, we like it to be a lot more higher too. Inflation, very important. As you can see that at least in the past 4 years, 3 years, we've had inflation rates down at around about below 2%. Inflation generally goes up, as you can see over here, after a cyclonic event. A small bunch of bananas in Suva after Cyclone Winston used to cost $20. Those of you who live in Suva or know about Suva, now it's come down to about $5 or $7. Bundle of beans, long beans, used to cost $5. Now it's about $2, I think, or $1.50. Yangona is still $110 a kilogram, but some people still drink it at the same rate. But the fact of the matter is that Yangona is still being sold at $110 a kilo when it used to be $40 a kilo. That lends to the basket of goods that increases your inflation rate, but the good news is it's actually coming down, and the latest figure shows it's about 4.1%. Foreign reserves, a lot of people don't understand foreign reserves and don't understand the critical importance of foreign reserves. International benchmark says that you should have, these are the number of months. Please tell me if I'm going too fast. International benchmark says that you should have at least 4 months worth of foreign reserves. That's the benchmark. Now, as I use this gentleman as an example, if we take those things as an example, we buy things in Japanese yen, we buy things in US dollars, we buy things in Australian dollars, we buy things in New Zealand dollars, in euros, in Singapore dollars. All our fuel comes from Singapore. We buy nearly $1 billion worth of fuel every year. Now, we need to have foreign currency to be able to trade. If you don't have it, you cannot trade. This is why some countries in the Pacific at the moment, I cannot mention their names necessarily, they have a very tight control on foreign reserves. In 2005, we had only 2.3 months worth of foreign reserves at only $549 million. The latest figure shows we today have $2.1 billion worth of foreign reserves. It's the highest Fiji has ever had in terms of foreign reserves. We are comfortable, as some of your lecturers will tell you, when international banks, when other international agencies looks at a country, they look at this. It goes to show whether you're able to pay your debts or not. Because sometimes we borrow money in foreign currency. So if your foreign reserves are good, the likelihood of your interest rate coming down is a lot more higher. People feel a lot more confident in your country if you have a comfortable foreign reserve situation. Fiscal deficit, right from the Ratu Mara government days of the Alliance government, every single government in Fiji has been running a deficit, except probably 3 times where we had a surplus. One surplus here, this is probably because of underspending. Deficit is essentially the amount of money you collect or have as revenue and the amount of money you spend. The difference between that is called a deficit. If it's in the negative, if it's in the positive, it's called a surplus. If you balance it out, obviously it's called a balanced budget. The longer the line, the worse off you are. The shorter the line, the better it is. But of course, we have to balance it. We are a developing country. We are a former colonial country where there's not much investment was made in many of the infrastructure that we are currently doing now. We have a legacy issue since independence, so we need to be able to balance things. I don't know how many of you sitting in this room have TELs or beneficiaries of TELs. How many of you are the beneficiaries of toppers? These things cost money, but it is an investment that government wants to make because we are investing in our human resources. If we invest in our human resources, we are investing in the future. 69.4% of the entire Fijian population today is below the age of 40. You are in the majority, I'm in the minority. And that's a fact. So we have to invest in you. But if there's an average age in this room, apart from all these old people in the front, if the average age in this room is say 20, in 40 years' time you'll all be 60 years old. So at the moment, the Fijian population, if this is the older age, this is the younger age, most of you sit here. In 40 years' time, the bulk of the Fijian population will sit up here. What does that mean? I just came back from Yokohama in Japan on Tuesday. They spend 1/3 of their budget on old people because the bulk of the population is what they call the super aging. People are in their 70s, 80s, 90s, the bulk of the population. The youth are in the minority. So their budget will be skewed accordingly. Our budget is skewed. In the past few years, we've skewed it accordingly to invest in the young people. But do it on a sustainable basis, because there are many more young people to come after you. So our budget priority is based on those types of objectives. As you can see, that we have been, as a government, we have a policy of reducing our deficit and keeping it around about 2.3. The average you can see is around about 2.3%. We have some aberrations here. We've been going down. Again, we had a cyclone here. We've been going down, but because of Winston, you can see this line becomes longer. As I said, we've spent an additional $220 million in this year's budget because of Winston. If Winston did not occur, this line would be probably somewhere here. It would be shorter than what it is. So, but please feel free to ask me questions. Revenue. We have to run government like a business too, because we have to make money for you. We have to make money to spend. If we make enough money, we have to borrow less. Government revenue in 2004 was $1.1 billion. Today, government revenue is $3.1 billion. Almost triple the amount. which is a good thing because we now have what we call an operating surplus. And I'll explain to you what operating surplus is. But the revenue changes have also come about in a number of ways. We have, for example, looked at things like taxation. We have overall reduced taxation. But what that means, it improves compliance. Generally, when your tax level is very high, people like to chorro from the system, put it bluntly. When the tax rate is low enough, people say, might as well pay it, there's no point keeping two books. But of course, there are people still stealing from the system. So we have increased compliance. We are collecting now more tax than before. Some areas we can still improve, but we've also got additional forms of revenue without it being burdensome on the ordinary people. What are the things that contribute to revenue? Value-added tax contributes 30%. Direct taxes contribute 21%. These are corporate tax, your PAYE, etc. Customs, tariffs. These are the duty that you pay at the border. We have a huge leakage problem. A lot of business houses, we've caught them out. Some are still, of course, escaping. We need to even tighten it more. They'll bring in $10 million worth of goods. They'll declare only 2 million at the border, so they pay duty only on the 2 million. The thinking is, if we don't get caught, that's fine. If we get caught, we'll say, oh, sorry, we'll just pay the right amount. We need to actually prosecute these people to set an example. There's a lot of improvement that can be made there, and also the VAT at the border. Service turnover tax, water resource tax, departure tax, of course, everybody pays $200. They leave Fiji, they pay $200. Mainly this revenue comes from tourists. Stamp duty, sale of assets, fees and charges. Now what we've done, we've grouped together for you the total expenditure on infrastructure development, health, education, access to justice and social protection. Some may call this the welfare budget. Infrastructure development, of course, we've allocated large sums of money now to building roads, bridges, jetties, electrical connectivity, the network of FEA, and also, of course, the water reticulated systems. A lot more people are being connected to it. But one of the other things, of course, is that we have to build back infrastructure better. Now, those of you who've recently been to Nandi, you would see the 4-lane road coming out of, from Naisoso, going through Matintar and all of that. Now, what do you see different apart from the 4 lanes? The one thing that you see different is that there is no overhead cables. Everything is gone underground. It costs us about $20 million more. In the cyclone, ladies and gentlemen, 6,000 kilometers of electrical cables went down after Cyclone Winston. We put them all back up. God forbid we have another major cyclone, it will come back down. We put it back up, it comes back down. We put it back up, comes back down. That, unfortunately, is the reality. This is why we talk a lot about climate change. So when we talk about building resilience, we talk about building back better to ensure, for example, your cables are underground. If something is underground, it cannot be blown down. The other problem we also found is a lot of the roads that have been built in Fiji, you'll find this very commonly, that if the road is here, they'll put the water pipes underneath the road. That's what they've been doing as a practice. So when there's a water leakage, the pipe gets old, there's a water leakage, the water seeps. You don't know about it. The ground gets soft. You say, oh my God, this road has got a lot of potholes. Why has it got potholes? Because there's water underneath the ground. The heavy trucks come, they create potholes. So what we've done, for example, in Nandi, we've taken out the pipes, put it on the side of the road. So if there's a water leakage, you fix up the pipe on the side. It costs money. When we were going to do these roads, Water Authority said, we have actually a plan to fix up all the old pipes, but our budget, we're going to do it in 2019. We said, well, what are you going to do? You're going to come back and dig up this beautiful road we built. So we have to coordinate. We have Kamal Gandar here, who is with National Planning. In the Department of National Planning, we put him on all the 3 boards of FRA, FEA, and Water Authority of Fiji, WAF. So he can also coordinate. So we need to take a coordinated effort, but it obviously costs more money. But you don't have to spend more money in the long term. Health. One of the major challenges we have with health is human resources. It's a big issue. As you know, we've made an announcement that the Minister for Health with her team is going off to India to get specialists. We have unfortunately not had investment in the human capital, again, in particular in the health sector. A person who's done an MBBS cannot simply come the next day and cut you open and play around with your heart. They have to be trained. It takes 10, 15 years for a person to become a cardiac surgeon. There is unfortunately no doctor available 24/7 in Fiji that can carry out an open heart surgery on anybody in Fiji. If I have a heart attack now, there's nobody available in Fiji to do so. That's a tragedy, ladies and gentlemen, in the 21st century, in a modern nation state, to have no Fijian who can actually do that and have that not available. So it is a situation that needs to be arrested. So today, if any of you are planning to become a doctor, if you do become a doctor and you join the civil service, as announced last year in the budget, we will pay for your postgraduate studies at FNU for free. You work during the day, you're going to do your night classes because we want more and more specialists developed for Fiji. In the meantime, we need to fill in the gap. And the gap is you need to bring in people from offshore. So if you get some people from offshore, they can not only provide the service, but also be able to train our own doctors. We should have an ear, nose and throat specialist. We don't even have a speech therapist. Some of you may have children, some of you will soon have children. If your child, for example, has a little bit of a speech impairment, it can be fixed at an early intervention. But we don't even have that. You say, oh, this guy can't talk properly, and forever you condemn them to be like that. So these are the skill sets that are missing. And unfortunately, these skill sets have not developed. This is why also, if you look at the topper scholarship, and I know a lot of people have raised this, is very much skewed towards science. Very much skewed towards those professions that we don't have enough people in. We don't have enough town planners, land surveyors. We don't have enough architects, doctors, engineers, nurses, marine scientists, foresters. Don't have a speech therapist. A lot of the high school students complained to us and they said, oh look, we don't have enough student counselors. A lot of the teachers actually double up as student counselors, but they're not even trained in counseling. I said, that's true. I said, so please put up your hands if you want to pursue your career as a student counselor or a counselor. None of them put up their hands. You see, because we very much think along very different lines. There are very good career paths in those areas. That's where we're spending money in education. Of course, free education. Last thing I'd like to say for education, one of the things that I've said to me, been said to us so many times, they said, we wish only in our time we had free education for high school, because I would have finished high school. My father could not afford to send me to school, and I had to go and work. And there's so many times I had people say to me, I used to come first or second or third in my school all the time. I finished Form 7. In those days, some people Form 6. But I could not go to university because my mother or father could not afford to send me to university. Many people like that. So now nobody has that excuse not to be able to go. Whether through TELS or toppers or even a technical college. That's where the money is going. Access to justice, legal aid commission officers. We spend now about $5.2 million a year in running legal aid. We have something like 14 different outlets throughout Fiji. Legal aid is the largest law firm in Fiji. There are about 42 lawyers. We have legal aid offices now in Nambawalu and far-flung places like that. So the theory being that nobody, just because you're poor or live in the rural areas, does not mean you should not have legal representation. We also get legal aid now to draft wills, or people who die intestate. Dying intestate means you die without a will. So you need somebody to solve it, issue the probate, etc. Women who going after men for maintenance claims. Those are the areas that they address. Social protection is social welfare payments. These are for single mothers, abandoned children, people living below the poverty line, disabled people, people now who are over the age of 66. There are many Fijians who don't have FNPF. People who've been living in villages all their life, or as farmers or fishermen, women who've never formally worked. Now they're old. Some of them, the children don't look after them. Some of them may not be that well off. So they are now given at least $50 a month. We started off by $30 a month for those over the age of 70. Now it's been reduced to the age of 66, but you receive $50 a month. It's interesting discussion. You know, we've had some representation in the consultations where some people have said to us, those people who receive welfare payments, they receive, you know, $50 food voucher and they receive some cash. So some people have said to us, can you give us all cash? And then the women will say, no, don't, because by the time the husband goes and collects the cash, we would have spent half of it on grog or cigarettes. You know, there are these different views. And some people say, no, we do actually need more cash, we can manage it. Some people say, give us all in food voucher. So there are different sort of views on this, but we've sort of reached a equilibrium, if you like, in respect of how you spread that protection. Expenditure mix. This is very important, ladies and gentlemen. Expenditure mix. When government spends money, there are two types of expenditures you have. One of them is your day-to-day running of government. So today I'm here, the PS and her team, we spend the night at the Waterfront Hotel. The hotel bills is paid for by government. The fuel is paid for by government. Our salaries are paid for by government. That's operating expenditure. The photocopying paper you use, the toilet paper you use, everything is operating expenditure. But our capital expenditure is the money we use to spend to build things. You people need more buildings at FNU. We give you a grant. How much grant we give FNU? About $60 million. $58.7 million we give to your university. You are completely funded by government. You're the government-run institution. Now, out of that money, some of it is for your operations, paying for your lecturers, paying for the whole electricity, what have you. Some portion of the money is, of course, to build buildings. You want to build a campus in Lambasa, so that goes to your capital expenditure. In the same way with government, we actually spend money in operating and capital. A good government will try and spend more money in capital expenditure. In other words, we're building for the future, in particular if you borrow money. 2004, of the 100% of money that was spent, 83% went into operating expenditure, 17% went into capital expenditure. Today the mix is different. We've reduced operating from 83 to 60 and capital has increased from 17 to 40. In other words, the mix is, that's our target rate, around about 70-30 we're looking at, or at least 60-40 now in this case. So that's the difference. In the example that I've used with the high school students, to simplify it, I said if we all decide to go and have a party at McDonald's but we don't have any money, and we go to one of the banks and say, can you please lend us some money because we want to have a party, the bank says, wonderful, we'll give you the money. We all go to McDonald's, we have the party, we eat the burgers, drink the drink. In the morning we wake up, the food is gone, the drinks are gone, but the debt is still there. You got nothing to show for it. But if we go to ANZ and borrow money to build something, even after you pay off the debt, you have something to show for it, because the asset is still there. Next, please. Now, this again shows the funding for roads, bridges, and jetties. You can see in 2004, when you have the wonderful PWD, which some people want back again, I understand, they spent $55 million. Today, we're spending $527 million on roads, bridges, and jetties. You'd be surprised that many people in the rural areas, in the maritime areas, don't have access to these things that they should have. There are many places that are now connected that weren't connected before. We now have, for example, a full Tahsil road from Nambuwalu all the way up to now Lambasa. That's really opened up the country, or that island, I should say. People are able to get their produce to the markets a lot quicker. The attrition rate of those vegetables are no longer as high as it used to be. Singatoka Valley, where everybody called the salad bowl of Fiji, the tomatoes, when they used to grow and put in the boxes, used to bump along the gravel road to the market. Nearly a third of the tomatoes would get damaged. Now it goes on Tahsil Road. So it creates value to your productive capacity. Water and energy, again, same thing. You can see we spent $337 million. Rural electrification, some of you would know who come from rural areas before. If you lived in a rural area, you wanted to be connected to the grid. Your homes or group of homes or your village had to make a contribution. You had to make a 10% contribution. Sometimes if you had 20 homes, 10 of them may give the contribution, the other 10 did not give, so you had to wait and government kept the money. So now we've returned all the money. We don't want to keep the money. We'll connect it for free, but of course there's a long list of people who want to be connected. We also give subsidized electricity, ladies and gentlemen. The unit cost of electricity for domestic usage is 34 cents. Those people who earn less than $30,000 a year, we pay 17 cents for them. You see, before the mindset was that we must keep electricity costs low, to the consumer. So even the people who are rich could benefit from it. Everybody benefited from it. But it meant that FEA was not run properly like a private enterprise or as an ongoing concern. The value is not being added to the company. So when you have the right tariff rates, so a person who's got a swimming pool in his house should pay more as opposed to the person who does not have a swimming pool and earns less. So those people, we target the assistance by subsidizing the electricity rate for them. So it's better to have, those of you economic students will know, it's better to have targeted assistance as opposed to a blanket assistance, because that's a waste of your money. It must be targeted. Funding for education, as I mentioned, just by comparing now, we're giving over $500 million for education. That line, ladies and gentlemen, will go up even higher. How many of you are first year students? Second? And third? This is your last year? Okay. So you see, you may be finishing off, but those people who are in the first and second will continue. So that funding needs to continue for them. But guess what? There's another bunch of first years about to come in. So that, of course, will mean it'll go up even higher. It will reach a stage where there will be an equilibrium there, because we know exactly people have gone the full cycle. So that we expect to be even more for the upcoming budget, because there are more people coming in through the system. Next, please. Health, as I said, we've increased the funding for health, but the main challenge for us is the recruitment of specialists and recruitment of more doctors. FNU, University of Fiji, does not produce enough graduates. We need more graduates, but we don't have enough of them. We in fact have had Ministry of Health returning money because they weren't able to spend money for the salaries, because they don't have enough money to they don't have enough people to spend it on. So the idea is the money is there, but we need to spend it on the right people. So our major challenge is human resources for health services. A person who's living in Singatoka, a person living in Ra, should not have to travel all the way to Lautoka, or all the way to Suva, just for some, semi-specialist skill sets, because there's a shortage of people. So we need to fill in that void. Now, this is what I mentioned earlier on. This is our operating revenue, right up to the top of the blue line. Operating expenditure is that, and the operating savings is increasing. You can see operating savings there was about 58 million. Now it's about 730 million in the savings. 730,000. 730,000. Now, next slide, please. Okay, a lot of people talk about government debt without necessarily knowing about debt very well. The line that I say that people need to be aware of is the line on top. The line that's on top. And that's your debt to GDP ratio. Debt to GDP, your GDP is your gross domestic product, which is essentially the value of your goods and services produced in the country. Now, normally, you measure your debt versus your GDP. So the example that I've used with the high school students, I hope you don't mind me using that with you, that if, for example, the total value of a GDP is $100 for the entire country, and we go out and borrow $20, your debt to GDP ratio is 20%. So you borrow 20% of what you produce. But if your wealth goes up to $500 and you go and borrow $50, which is 2.5 times more than what you actually borrowed, your debt to GDP ratio is only 10% because your wealth has increased. So these are what you call the nominal sums, but your debt to GDP ratio, as you can see, and we have a target to reduce the debt to GDP ratio, has been coming down, except there's a turn up here because of Winston. If Winston had not occurred, this line actually would have gone down even further. $230 million you could have knocked off that. So that really is the main figure to watch, your debt to GDP ratio, as opposed to the nominal figure itself. Because if your wealth is increasing, your productive capacity is increasing, then your capacity to be able to borrow in the nominal sum has increased. That's the figure to watch. Now let me show you some examples of other countries, the debt to GDP comparison. Japan has a debt to GDP ratio of 239.2%. In other words, they're borrowing 239% more than what the actual GDP is. US, Maldives, some comparisons. Seychelles, which is an island state in the Indian Ocean. They've been very much at the front of climate change. Nauru, Mauritius again. Mauritius is a very interesting country. I went there for the first time this year. Mauritius is very similar to Fiji. Their economic wealth was a lot lower than ours, but they have put in place a policy, a very forward-looking policy, and they decided to reposition themselves. So they have spent a lot of money in infrastructure in recent times. In fact, Mauritius does not even have a river. We have many rivers. They have a water problem. So they built enormous dams just to hold water for people to drink. They saw themselves as being a stable country next to the continent of Africa. So they're attracting a lot of foreign investment from Africa. Africans are coming and doing their medical procedures. It's become an ITC hub. They've invested quite heavily in that area. So they were able to, they increased their debt levels because they're actually building for the future. You'll see very soon, their debt to GDP ratio will come down because the productive capacity of that country is increased. We sit here at 46.3. Australia is 41.1. You would expect Australia to be much lower given the fact they had a huge boom in the natural resources sector. But nonetheless, their debt to GDP ratio is very close to ours too. And these are the other countries by comparison. So this is the last slide. Our economy is set to accelerate 3.6% growth in 2017 with favorable growth prospects for the medium term. We see a lot of increased private sector investment and optimism, a lot of factories, a lot of warehouses, a lot of supermarkets. A lot of people are extending their homes, building their fences, whatever the case may be. Prudent, be very mamangi about things. We try and run government very tightly, very conjuice in the right places you have to be. High capital expenditure and operating savings. Broad-based growth, as we said, is very critical for any government to have a broad-based growth. In the same way with the tourism sector, we want to spread our risk. At the moment, 51% of all the tourists who come to Fiji come from Australia. Nearly 16 or 17% come from New Zealand. So nearly 70% of all the tourism arrivals in Fiji come from only 2 countries. It's not a good position to be in. We want more of them to come, yes. But we'd rather have people from other countries too. 15% comes from North America. We want more Chinese, we want more Indians, we want people from other parts of the world to come to Fiji because we need to spread the risk. If you depend on only 2 countries, assuming there is an economic downturn in Australia, guess what will happen? Less Australians will travel. When less Australians will travel, it have a huge impact on us. But if the tourism arrivals from Australia were say about 20%, then you can rely on the balance of the 80% of the arrivals. It doesn't affect you as adversely as it would if you're dependent on only 1 or 2 source markets. But this is why, for example, the Fijian government is partnering with Fiji Airways. We've got a marketing strategy with them to the tune of $18 million because they're flying to Singapore. Singapore opens up new routes. We're now flying to San Francisco. We fly to LA. We fly to Hong Kong. We have to have a strong national carrier. This is why we don't open skies. You have to have a strong national carrier. It not only creates jobs, but it reduces your dependency on an outside airline to bring your tourists. In particular, if tourism is a major revenue source earner. So we want to fly to Beijing. We want to fly to other destinations. As long as the air services agreement is right, we'll do those destinations. Foreign reserves, as we said, is at a record high, and inflation is set to stabilize at 3%. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the presentation. Now, you may digest all of this and you may want to make submissions. This is the address you can send it to, Budget Consultations. If you want to post it, try not to post it because it may not reach us by 19th of May. If you're visiting Suva, you can drop it off at that address. But please, make your submissions if you don't want to make it now, and send it to that email address. So I'll open up the floor now. Please feel free to make suggestions, comments. You can ask questions, and if you want to have any further queries, please do so. We've got somebody going around with the mic. Please feel free to ask any questions. Thank you. Issues you raised with budget consultation at economy.gov.fj. You can post it, but please, we need it by next Friday. And of course, if you're visiting Suva, or those of you who live in Suva, yes.